for talk about next generation infrastructure, containers, microservices. You have it. So first, can I ask, for people in the audience, can I get a quick, I just want to make sure we're all on like a level playing field, because I'm guessing some of these terms are going to be thrown around for quite a bit. So if you raise your hand if you're familiar with Docker. All right, that seems good enough. Okay, that'll work. That's the most important one, probably. Okay, so I'm going to have the panelists do a quick introductions of themselves and their companies, and then we'll get right into the questions.
Hi, I'm Florian Leibert. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mesosphere. And at Mesosphere, we're building the data center operating system. And the data center operating system gives you public cloud-like platform services from an open ecosystem on any infrastructure. So you're not locked into, for example, the higher level services that AWS gives you. And it really expands, it's really not just about containers, it's really about also data services and all of these building blocks that you actually need when you're building modern applications.
Hi, I'm Murli, Thirumale. Just a quick personal note. I mean, it's a highly educated crowd, so I have a BTech from IIT BHU and a MBA from Kellogg. And this is my third startup after a stint of about 10 years at NHP as a GM. What Portworx does is we build a persistent storage layer for stateful containers.
Hi, I'm the CEO and founder of Mashape. We are infrastructure for managing and securing serverless and microservice APIs.
Hi, I'm Sheng Liang, co-founder and CEO of Rancher Labs. We build a container management system for Docker, for Kubernetes, for some of the latest technologies that's been invented every day in the container ecosystem. So we just want to make sure that our customers can use these technologies and put containers in production without having to hire a big team of developers just to worry about infrastructure.
All right, great. And so one more housekeeping item. I don't have a working TiEcon app, so if you have questions at the end, we'll save like 5 minutes. You can just come up and shout them, and we'll repeat them and answer them. So to begin, I think a good starting point here, guys, is, and maybe someone's brave enough to step up and answer this one, but can you explain? Can someone explain containers or microservices in the context of, maybe cloud computing or VMs or these bigger, more established markets that a lot of people are familiar with?
Happy to take that one. So for background, before starting Mesosphere, I worked at 2 companies that really embraced cloud and cloud native from day zero, and those were Twitter and Airbnb. And I'll tell a quick little story, and I think that can introduce what microservices really are useful for. So when I joined Twitter was going through this phase of hypergrowth, and what that meant was, Twitter was A, real time, and B, you can have as many followers as you want. And that resulted in what we called the Justin Bieber problem. And that was, Justin Bieber had millions of followers. Every time he sent a tweet, you had to do millions of real-time inbox deliveries, right? And obviously, as Twitter grew from 1 million or so monthly active users to tens of millions and later to hundreds of millions of monthly active users, the underlying infrastructure needed to change, because it actually was, when we started out, it was a Ruby on Rails application. So when I joined in 2009, it was literally one monolithic application that ran all of the business logic, and that was backed by some MySQL servers. And in order to really deal with the growth of the organization in terms of the technology and product teams, but also with the user base, what we wanted to do is we wanted to take apart this big monolithic application into smaller components. And back then that was still called service-oriented architecture. And that allowed us to really have smaller teams focus on just their small problem and define with an API the contract how this could be accessed. And it really allowed us to scale our engineering team, but then it also resulted, of course, in a more scalable application, because individual components could be scaled independently of one another, and you could optimize these components for just what they were trying to solve. And that's really, I think, what's one of the first large-scale microservices architectures out there.
All right. Yes, I mean, I would love to get some other opinions too, and specifically, like, you know, a lot of people talk about. I think a lot of people conflate. You know, my opinion, conflate VMs and containers as like one as a replacement for the other, but I'm not sure that's entirely accurate.
Yeah, maybe I can, you know, I'd like to add something to that. Like, first of all, I really respect a lot of the work that, you know, Florian and the Mesos community and all that stuff did to really advance the technology of containers and microservices, large-scale orchestration and scheduling. But I think there's actually, from a business perspective, we also kind of saw a slightly different opportunity. I mean, of course, these days you can use Kubernetes or Rancher or a variety of these technologies to really build microservices. But what we find is, in reality, a lot of the enterprise customers or startups, they don't really have the ability to achieve the scale of Twitter or Airbnb. You know, that is really more of a norm. So I used to tell a story to people. Like, imagine if you're kind of building something, right? You're building. You're really building a product, and imagine if a lot of people, if you're just kind of building a product to solve the scale problem, but then if vast majority of the customer base doesn't quite feel that that's their most pressing problem, guess what their most pressing problem is? It actually tend to be speed up product development so they can hopefully get more customers, and one day they'll have a Twitter problem, Justin Bieber problem on their hand, which would be a very good problem. We've actually taken a lot of mileage out of we've been able to go very far, sort of focus maybe a little bit less on just going with absolute scale, but just really make that technology more accessible so that a lot of people can actually take advantage of that, even when they haven't necessarily achieved that scale or haven't achieved cloud nativeness. So I guess kind of the other point, final point I want to make is, in our world, containers don't necessarily equal to cloud native or even microservices. You know, there's really nothing wrong when a lot of our customers take a few WebLogic applications or WebSphere applications and turn them into these fairly sizable monolithic container. They still get the benefit of a portability of workload. They still get the benefit of CI/CD. They still kind of get the benefit of ease of management. So I just kind of want maybe express a slightly different view on that.
I just like to kind of address the VM versus containers questions. I mean, I think they're really kind of two different constructs, right? VMware was really a dramatically better way to manage and get efficiency out of your infrastructure, whereas containers really are a really wonderful way to package your applications so that you can really achieve two things. You know, first, you achieve independence from the infrastructure to a large extent. And then the second thing is, in this post-DevOps, post-cloud, post-custom hardware world, it really provides the basis for a complete automated, way to orchestrate and manage those applications in this new world, as opposed to the old world. Now, as we've kind of gone out on deployments with various customers, we really see a mix of things where we've seen containers being run on the cloud, on-prem. Half of our business comes from the cloud, half of our business is on-prem at the current time. The other thing that we've seen is really there's both bare metal and kind of, especially on the greenfield deployments, and especially when they're kind of running at scale in a performant way. But also there's, obviously every cloud deployment is on VMs, and we really don't see this angst that I think has been kind of pushed maybe more than it needs to be about VMs versus containers. I think the two coexist, and there are people with specific needs that can kind of do both or pick just a container-only approach.
So maybe you guys can talk about, and I kind of like to get everyone's take on this. I'll start with Sheng, and we can work our way back down. But like, why now? Why are we talking about, because VMs are only, 15 years old, maybe since VMware came to prominence, maybe. Cloud computing is much younger than that, and is still kind of in its infancy, a lot of people would argue. So why now are we all of a sudden moving, we're past cloud, now we're talking about microservices, and then we're talking about like serverless or functions, right? What is it about now that these discussions are actually, or this is such a hot topic?
Yeah, I'll just say something real quick, because cloud computing, as say represented by AWS at the infrastructure layer, really changed the world. People don't really worry about infrastructure anymore, but it hasn't gone fast enough. I think that sort of the consensus is now I can deploy a machine quickly, but what people care about is apps, and what does it take to actually run an app at large scale, and make it reliably, and make sure we can develop it quickly. So I think containers burst up on the scene just at the right time, after there's a fair bit of adoption of cloud, so that infrastructure becomes much less of a bottleneck, and then it enables organizations to develop and deploy and upgrade and operate apps a lot more efficiently. And I think that's a big reason of that.
And can I expand on that one? So one thing, why now? If you go back in history, and I grew up in Italy, so all you study is history. You don't study math. You just study history for 40 years. And if you go back to 1906, Henry Ford commercialized the assembly line. And so what happened, it makes mass distributions very efficient. So if you look at software today, it's really much becoming an assembly line. For various reasons. First one, open source, it's mainstream, and that allowed the best technology, open and dynamics, to penetrate enterprise and actually make the SOA dream of 10 years ago a reality, because things actually works and actually are lightweight, usable, and expandable. And so open source has a big factor into why now, but also history repeats itself. And so what happened 100 years ago is now happening in software, and other than the assembly line piece where you combine APIs and services and open source to build software, and in the past you were building cars and you're still building cars, then in the 90s what happened, the ERP came out, and the enterprise resource planning is just automation on top of the assembly line. If you pick a Wikipedia page and you ask what is an ERP, the main features are analytics, monitoring, automation, testing. So you can get those features and put in software, and you get automation at the DevOps level, which is just making the assembly line more efficient. And so those two things that happen in history are just now happening in software. And so I'm just a real believer that should be the pitch inside an enterprise. It's just happening, and because it already happened in the past.
I see two mega trends. These have been continuing actually from past years. The first one is really the importance of technology in being able to compete. So there's many businesses that in the past competed on their core stuff, which may not have had to do with technology. And now technology is becoming key to some of these industries like retail, banking, and so on. And you've seen that with CIOs moving up from, at one time, reporting way down in the organization, now reporting directly to the CEO. The second trend that's been happening is, as they have tried to make these business transformations happen via technology, the CIOs have found that they've been held hostage by either infrastructure itself, and also the ability to deploy these apps fast. I'll give you an example. This is a mythical example, so I don't want to reveal anything about our existing customers directly, but let's say you are a CEO of a smaller bank. And about 9 months ago, I'm sure you guys saw the ads for how Wells Fargo you could just take a photo of this check and deposit it. And just, if you were in this tier of banking, which was trying to invest heavily in ATMs and move away from branch banking to this type of an ATM on your phone, this thing completely disrupted part of that workflow for deposits. And now, so imagine you're a CEO, you go beat on the CIO, go, what the heck is this? What do I do? The CIO goes over to their developer, and the developer, as always, sharp as ever, says, no problem, boss. There's these image recognition apps. I've got these scripts I can write. I've got a backend. This is trivial. I'll whip something up in 2 or 3 months. And sure enough, he does that. It all works. And then they go to IT to deploy it. And IT says, well, no problem. This is easy. I just have to upgrade the MySQL server. I've got you're using a different version of Linux. 6 months from now, we'll speed it up and get this thing out. So all the way from the CIO to the CEO, they're pulling their hair out. So this is the time of post-DevOps, post-business transformation is being enabled by things like microservices and containers, because it really goes back to, it frees them from the tyranny of infrastructure. And second, the issue is you're now in this DevOps tool chain, which is super fast. So now you can speed from the creation of some solution to deploying it really, really fast. That whole build, test, deploy cycle has been sped up by things like containers, microservices, and that is one of the kind of mega trends that is affecting this. In addition to, of course, all the open source and some of the wonderful work that I think people in the ecosystem, including the people at the table here, have done to make this stuff really, really, really easy to use.
Yes, so I think a lot of the macro trends obviously have been mentioned here. I think if you really zoom in and look at how containers actually, what containers actually give you as a developer, right, for the developer experience, you can take a container and write your application, test it on your local laptop, and have that very same container later shipped to the cloud, run the very same way on the cloud as it did on your laptop. So this, what was mentioned before, I mean, it just really speeds everything up a lot. And I think a lot of that really has become important because developers have actually become much more important in organizations, and nowadays developers actually make decisions as to what technologies get deployed. In the past, developers were put into a box, right? Like, hey, this is the technology stack we're using, and that's what we're hiring for. I think if you look at disruptive companies, it's the inverse. The developer swipes his credit card, connects to a couple of cloud APIs, writes an application with the tools and the languages and in the ecosystem that they want to, wherever they are most productive. And of course, open source, as it has been mentioned, is a big part of this. But you need to do that in order for companies to be really transformative, right? And yeah.
So from a business perspective, how do you bridge that gap though? Because these 3 of the 4 panelists are selling what I think would be argued is infrastructure, some kind of infrastructure solutions. But we're talking about developers and applications, and like how do you go about going into a business and saying, like, who do you even go to? Do you go to developers to sell what you're selling? Do you go to an operator, someone who's actually going to deploy and manage the stuff? Like that part of it still seems to me like there might be a disconnect.
Well, I'll just take that since I thought you were looking at me. But,
well, you're my last time.
Our product is fundamentally comes into play this stateful layer to manage data when you're deploying containers, comes into play primarily in the deployment stage. However, as most people have learned now, because of, as Florian said, that this is all developer inspired and sometimes developer led. In our case, I think it's not an either or, it's an and. We have to win the hearts of the developer and the wallets of IT ops. And that's, I think, something that most startups and even larger organizations are discovering. And it actually creates a dichotomy because these two people are inspired and marketed to completely differently, right? So there are challenges for startups like us. And actually, it works to our advantage because I think it's just the younger, hip folks working in the development communities seem to kind of prefer the agility and responsiveness that they get from startups. But so I think that actually works to advantage of startups in this environment. And I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs here, and I think this is really a fantastic opportunity in this new type of market where legacy does not rule.
And I think also with the advent of open source, your technology is already deployed oftentimes accidentally maybe into production without a company actually backing it, right? So I think with Docker, for example, I think it was very early on that companies started to use it. And I mean now of course I think the container itself is a commodity, right? So it's there are not too many unknowns there. But as you move up the stack, I think there's a lot of monetization opportunity with integrating various tools from the ecosystem and just going beyond what a container can do, going to the larger level of orchestration, going to monitoring, going to logging. All of those are really big opportunities.
Yeah, and if you think back to VMware, after VMware, there wasn't any large company that did an IPO and then it grew to a certain market size that it's closed source. So after that, there is really nothing else. So if you think about it, where the future is going, I think there will be a VMware, but it will be open source at its core. And if you think about the last 6-7 months, there's been 7-8 VC investment of a certain size in open source companies. There also been a MuleSoft, for example, IPO, which it was at least originally was open source, and the cloud era, and then you're going to have Elasticsearch. You will have a wave of open source company finally eating the public market, and if you then go down 10 years later, you will see them getting a certain size, other than Red Hat, which was really the only example for 20 years. But now you can see this is changing, and you will see large corporation coming out of open source.
Yeah, so TiEcon is a entrepreneur conference. I know a lot of you in the audience are either entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, or aspiring entrepreneurs. So one thing I really relate to the question is I feel like these days the way you penetrate the market is fundamentally changed. The enterprise market, it's becoming less of a speed and feed. It used to be a lot easier. If your competitor make a 10G switch, you make an 100G switch. Then it's kind of obvious why you're different, why you're better, or you just make it cheaper. But in the days of online services, cloud services, and open source software, pretty much the only thing, technology itself becomes very difficult to differentiate, because whatever you have today, your competitors will have tomorrow, and it's all boils down to some more nebulous form of the product or the user experience or how people love your product. So I think that actually in some ways the bar is becoming harder in many ways, because you just can't easily turn technology advantage into product and market advantage. But on the other hand, it really brings a lot of new opportunities to even disrupt the incumbents, because it pretty much, people have been talking about consumerization of IT for many years, but I've never seen it more real as it is today. I think everything could be disrupted. Even the undisputed, I firmly believe even some of the undisputed leaders today can probably be disrupted someday, and if someone else comes up, has the unique insight to come up with a better experience, better product. So I think that's kind of how you get into, as an entrepreneur, how you get your product into these large organizations.
So I'm glad we're talking about actually like the entrepreneurial aspect of it, and also open source has been brought up a lot. So I want to just ask specifically, in this space, in containers and microservices and with serverless, whatever you want to call it, like open source is and all infrastructure really, open source is the name of the game now. But it also, if you follow open source companies, maybe Red Hat excluded, right, who have gone public, or just look at the business models aren't yet solidified. I think there's still a lot of figuring out going on. So what's your advice if you're trying to get into this space? Everything is open source. Docker, Kubernetes, DCOS, right? Everything is open source. Like, how do you get in here and go, you know what, this is $1 billion business? Like, what's the trick?
Elastic, it's a multi-billion-dollar valuation, and they have a very decent revenue run rate. Cloudera is the same, MuleSoft is the same. So, the question is how you get over the 200 millions a year and go in the billion. But definitely we crossed the chasm where you don't do more than 50 or 40 millions a year. There is several private companies today, open source, that are way on a 200 million run rate. They're going to IPO in the next 12, 18 months. And then also there are the Kubernetes that don't have any actual commercial nerve inside yet, but it's happening.
Well, I mean, they're also losing money pretty fast too. So
Yeah, I'd like to actually disagree a little bit. I think the open source movement, while it's fantastic, it's really much more focused on the developer part of the organization. Portworx is a closed source product, and it seems like blasphemy to say that nowadays, but we have open APIs to the rest of the industry, and we're really serving a DevOps, IT ops person. So if you think about it, the developer cares about innovation and speed. Still today, in a lot of our Fortune 2000 deployments like GE and Lufthansa, these folks care about reliability. That's still what they are paid to deploy things that are reliable and scalable. So I think it's in some cases, I think particularly as these technologies move into production, there will be more opportunities for closed source or some kind of a mixed mode type of product. The other thing I would say is that there's a constant battle that you see within in this arena. One of them is adoption, which is open source, of course, promotes that, and the other one is monetization, which is the challenge that companies face in this. And to some extent, just having come from infrastructure legacy type of products in the past, for me, this new opportunity is really about a culture clash within the vendor community and even within the IT department. And I think companies that solve this culture clash and figure out how to get adoption and monetization are going to be the winners in this in terms of an execution plan. And it's true of our customers and of startups.
And I think what you said is really right. I think it doesn't necessarily have to be open source. I think open APIs can really also work. But I think what it boils down to is creating a really amazing experience, an amazing product, right? That people love, that's reliable. And I think if you look, for example, at the Hadoop ecosystem, I think the product itself, right, is a little fragile, to put it lightly, right? And I think it actually is not a great experience, and a lot of development had to happen on top of the base layers of Hadoop for it to become a much better product. So Spark is fairly recent, but even with Spark and HDFS, you're still missing a lot of pieces, and I think that has been the challenge, that this technology, when these companies started to sell it, wasn't necessarily set up for massive success, right? It was always argued that Hadoop will actually eat the Oracle market to some extent, and I think that hasn't happened to date, right? It's the revenue that all the Hadoop players combined is still like significant. I mean, it's not even a percent of probably the Oracle revenue or 2% of Oracle revenue. So, but Oracle is actually a pretty good product, right? I mean, it's actually it performs really well, and I think that's what it boils down to, creating a great experience that developers and operators both would want to pay for, and creating this differentiation.
Yeah, I mean, real quickly, I run an open source company, but I would be the first to say it's very difficult to make money with open source. We haven't even figured that out yet, and I think we face this problem head on. And which means we got to find other ways to make money, whether you run an online service or, or doing something else, But just offering support on open source alone is just not going to cut it anymore. That's just the reality today.
All right, I think we have time for one question if someone wants to jump up and ask one. All right, first hand up.
Yeah. One of the things is always mentioned from our customers. If you go with open source, how you can assure me that you are going to have sustainability and growth with your product? And there is a lot of dependency on the other parties as well. So we are actually in a challenge now to decide to go with open source or go with companies like AWS or any kind of platforms that's commercialized. So I need just some tips or criteria what's the benefit by going with open source for a software company like us as a startup to build their platform.
I mean, I think Florian said it. To me, open source accelerates innovation. So using open source technology as the basis for some of what you do, or being in that ecosystem, is really a fantastic thing to do. However, it just comes down to, does your product work as intended in the use case that you have there? And I think that's been where the industry focus is moving, right? So for example, if you look at Portworx, we specialize really in the issue of how do you solve for data problems like persistence of data in a multi-node environment? How do you provide high availability? How do you provide security and orchestration of the data layer? And that is a critical issue. And at that point, it goes well beyond, is your product open source, or using open source technology? Is your product deployable and reliable at scale? And I think both these are important at different phases of a life cycle of an industry. In the container industry, we're right at the cusp of that change, where people are, if you go 17 billion downloads of Docker, this is the free is Gleek club, kind of is the way I think about it. And now you have these people who are now trying to use it in a deployment situation, and these are people who have serious businesses that are running on this type of infrastructure. They actually are less concerned about is it just open, and more concerned about how does it work for me. And I think that's been the transformation that some of us here are really actually, I think, part of that making that happen.
All right, and we are out of time. So thank you, panelists. And if you have questions, catch them off stage.